Hi, and welcome to the Bruce Channel. I'm Bruce, and once again, things are busy, so relax, have a cup of cuppa, and hang on. Okay, maybe a little more about this later, but speaking of hang on, I just read this week that Ohio, where I'm originally from, has an official rock song, Hang On Sloopy. Now, I've got nothing against the song. When the Buckeye Band plays it, it is rousing, but did the state legislature actually spend time putting forth and debating this as a resolution? On the clock, as in paid? Okay, at least we're not wrestling with deadly weather. Not that everyone's completely shoveled out, but the big storm is history. As I mentioned last week, where I am, we escaped catastrophic ice, but not by very much. DC did get a huge number, 24 or so inches, as predicted, but prior to the storm, it was said that New York City's forecast was iffy. Yeah, they might get some, maybe 6, maybe 8 inches. Central Park had more than DC. I think it was 28 inches. One more weather note, although it's not recent. Well, it's not long ago, but not real recent, and certainly not wintry. I meant to mention it, and it got away from me, but did you catch the fact that 2 weeks ago there was an Atlantic hurricane? Yeah, in the middle of January. First time that's happened in over 60 years. Named Alex. It was short-lived, but it did pass over the Azores. But hey, it was 70 in New York a month ago, right over Christmas, right? So we'll just have to accept that the world has indeed gone round the bend. Oh, and although we've had some cold weather in the east, now the near-term forecast for the east is going to be warmer than normal. So, well, here today it's going to be 60, but in the east, it's January, it's February. These are very fine times to be warmer than normal. Okay, quick word. I meant to tell you this right off. This, a little bit weird, but earlier this week I auditioned as a Southern gentleman with a political agenda, and as soon as I leave here, I'm doing not a funeral director, a pastor at a funeral. So, using the same look. All right, Super Bowl 50 coming up next week. Not Super Bowl L. Yeah, that's an L for you, isn't it? Not Super Bowl L. It'll be 50 and it'll be played next week. Now, I'm not picking today. Obviously, it would behoove me to wait till next week because, who knows what news comes out this week? Who might get injured or disciplined or even, violent stomach virus. So it would be premature, but 2 points. I am exactly at this point 50-50. I've been throughout the playoffs each weekend, which means I cannot coast and end up winning. I was one game left, and I'm going to be either ahead or behind. Last week, I picked the Panthers. I thought it would be kind of close. They did win, but they showed what they can do. They tore out the Cardinals. Now, they have done that a few times during the season, but rarely did they do it for the whole game. Doesn't mean they're a lock for next week. I don't know. We'll see. I did pick the Patriots last week, but they lost. And my goodness, Denver's defense has been good all season, but they pummeled one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, Tom Brady. So we'll see. But of course, that's why they play the game. Carolina last was to the Super Bowl, actually just once, and they lost a close game to the Patriots. So next week, we'll have to wait and see. I am very fortunate to have some wonderful friends and relatives, and I'm sure that probably most of us can genuinely say that. But I'm also fortunate because some of them are mental giants, and I mean that sincerely. When I'm talking with them, I sometimes secretly think, why are they talking to me? Do they think I'm smart? And how can I keep them fooled? I was reminded of that this past week. Some of us regularly exchange email messages as a group on various topics. Hey, I know you like this. Here's a podcast on that. Or, I understand the point you made, but here's the opposite view. Pretty well articulated. I know you'd wish to consider it. And then, of course, we'll hit reply all and recirculate them and keep the dialogue going. Well, this week, one of us started one of those. It wasn't me. He started a dialogue he mentioned that Marvin Minsky had just died recently and that he remembered the name from a book he'd read. The other in this threesome replied, oh yeah, I remember when we talked about that. He was always one of my favorites, and this whole time I'm thinking, Minsky? The only Minsky I know of was the owner of a burlesque house in the early 20th century named Minsky, As a young man, I saw a movie called The Night They Raided Minsky's. I don't remember the plot, but it took place at the burlesque house, and as young as I was, it made quite an imprint. I remember it very clearly because it was one of the first, it may have been the first, I don't know, to make visible and not behind fabric of any sort a woman's bosom. Would that be bullseye? Anyway, I think of them and am in awe. No, my friends. I think of them. I think of my friends' brain power and am in awe. All right, some anniversaries went by this week. Thursday, January 28th, was the 30th anniversary of the Space Shuttle Challenger's explosion, 73 seconds into its flight. If you were around, it instantly seared its way into your consciousness, creating an indelible memory of where you were and what you were doing, and there are other instances of that. Fortunately, there aren't that many. One might argue our society is nuts, but imagine if we were bombarded with these things more often, with these incredibly heart-wrenching moments. My parents had Pearl Harbor, the death of Franklin Roosevelt, and I suppose Lincoln's assassination caused the same as John Kennedy's did 100 years later. Of course, we've had the Oklahoma City bombing, 9/11, and of course we also have much more frequently the mass shootings at schools and theaters and things like that. Another anniversary that came by this week, and I mentioned this last month, Wednesday, the 27th, was the 260th anniversary since the birth of Mozart. There are any number of composers who might be argued legitimately to be the best, and some of that is flavored by one's taste. There are the three Bs: Brahms, Bach, Beethoven, Franz Liszt, Mendelssohn. But, no one can deny Mozart belongs in the forefront of that discussion. And when you consider his output, over 600 works, it is even more amazing because he died at the age of 35. If you haven't seen the movie Amadeus, you owe it to yourself to do so. It's often poignant, it's funny, it's touching. There's some stunning visuals. Some of the concert scenes filmed in some of Europe's great concert halls. As I said, it's stunning. And the music, if you listen through a good sound system, it's stunning again. Now, it's not perfect. As I said to a friend just the other day, it doesn't matter if it's an action movie or a dialogue movie set in drawing room English society with tea. Any drama has to have some conflict. There's got to be some tension. There must be some unknown facet to the outcome. So, in the movie Amadeus, the conflict was somewhat manufactured. They made a villain out of Antonin Salieri. He wasn't a villain, not really. They turned him into a duplicitous competitor of Mozart's. Now, there really isn't any evidence at all to support that, but you have got some drama. Final note. Back when that came out, I had a couple of girlfriends. One was a girlfriend and the other was her friend, who was also my friend. Anyway, they talked about going to see Amadeus. I naturally asked, "See what?" They replied, "Amadeus," and that it was taken from his middle name. I knew him as Wolfgang Mozart. They explained patiently, "No, it's Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart." Aha, turns out the movie missed on that too. He was baptized Johannes Chrysostomus Wolfgangus Theophilus Mozart. But fit that on a marquee, all right? Okay, Mozart, of course, was a composer and he wrote music. And as you know, there are myriad types of music, and defining them, distinguishing them, takes sometimes some artful, subtle language. A sonata versus a sonatina, a ballade. Of course, in popular music, there are variants also. There's pop and rock and country, and there's little genres even within. And there is folk music, which probably could be considered the most organic as it differs widely from culture to culture, and of course it stems from the culture. The difference between folk music of the indigenous people of the South Pacific can be broadly differentiated from the folk music of the British Isles. But what about the differences between those found in the British Isles? I found a guide to the traditional folk songs and how to tell that I wanted to share. If a song mentions fighting and drinking and sex, it's Scottish. Take away the sex, but leave in the fighting and drinking, and it's Irish. If you take away both the sex and the fighting, but leave only the drinking, it's English. But if you take away all three, add some coal mines, and have a men's chorus sing it in unison, it's Welsh.
Hey, let me tell you about my book, Shrink. For most of my adult life, I weighed a little over 100 pounds. Not much more than in this picture taken when I was about 17 and considering becoming a jockey. But as is often true, once I crossed into my 40s, extra weight came and it stayed. For years I tried to lose, instead gained, and ended up 153 pounds. And I'm embarrassed to show you this video. Then I learned that it isn't about calories and exercise, but instead it's about what you eat. You might say, sure, ice cream makes you fat. But there were surprises, things like orange juice not being such a wise choice if you're trying to lose weight. So I just made some basic changes to what I ate, not how much, and the weight just fell off. Now, nearly 3 years later, it is still off. And don't misunderstand, I'm eating foods I like, not bamboo shoots. Friends ask me how I did it so often, I put it in a book. It's available as an ebook for all platforms, and the print edition is available at barnesandnoble.com and amazon.com. Hey, you can shrink too.
All right, welcome back. If you'd like to write to us, you can at the Bruce Channel at yahoo.com. You know how that works. You can go back and watch any of our previous shows at tinyurl.com/Bruce Channel and also at our Facebook page, The Bruce Channel. Okay. At the beginning of this week, I had determined I would say very little about either the Democratic Forum or the Republican debate, but as things grow more preposterous, how can it be avoided? So, briefly, I remain upset, maybe angry works, but at least upset that the Democratic leadership has so patently engineered the debate schedule to favor Secretary Clinton. There's now talk they may schedule a couple more, but the reason it's so dastardly is because the original schedule had only 6, and 4 of them would be on when there was no one would watch, opposite big football games. So I hope they do schedule more. We have to see them in action. All the population needs to see them in action, otherwise it's not what it's supposed to be. Anyway, Secretary Clinton may become the nominee, she may win the election, she may become a good president. But all the email stuff hasn't absolutely been released. It's pretty well established that there's probably not a criminal aspect to it, but what if something comes out? The people wouldn't have much time then to size up the others, you know? Anyway, compared to what the Republicans are doing, all right, while some Democrats probably think that Chairman Debbie Wasserman Schultz has maintained too much control, on the other side, probably many Republicans are wishing their chairman, Reince Priebus, would have some control. They are absolutely herding cats. Briefly, the stage over there. Iowans caucus Monday night. Donald Trump was leading, but in Iowa, the Republicans are more heavily represented by evangelicals than in most states. So Ted Cruz, who has always set his persona as one of piety, the better to capture them, he starts to gain on Donald. And no one could call him pious, even if one accepts his claim of Christianity. So Donald starts knocking Cruz, getting on the birth and the thing in Canada, and then Donald gets the endorsement of Sarah Palin. And then, in a real butt kick, he gets the endorsement of Jerry Falwell Jr., head of Liberty University, one of the country's most conservative Christian schools. I say that's a butt kick because that's where Ted Cruz announced his candidacy. I'm sure he was counting on that endorsement. Now, midweek, Iowa's governor, who's in his 6th term, he's very popular, says don't vote for Cruz. Literally, don't vote for Cruz. Then, you can't make this up. Then Trump goes AWOL. He announces he won't go to the debate. Candidates want FaceTime. And he says, nah, I don't like that Kelly person. I'm not going. And he gets more coverage for saying that than anyone else gets for anything. This is totally uncharted territory. It is no longer possible to read the tea leaves, at least not well. I predicted that he's not the candidate. I find it really hard to believe that he might be. I still find it hard to believe, but anyway, it is either a brilliant move or it's stupid. we'll have to wait and see, but my guess, I could be wrong, I'm thinking it's brilliant. With the endorsements he's now got, he's reestablished his lead in the polls. The other candidates going into the debate who all, want to get closer to the two to run in third, they could now not shoot at both of them. They all shot at Ted Cruz. So, keep in mind too that he might do okay in South Carolina. It's the South after all. But it's hard to see him doing well in New Hampshire, which is next week. It's really ironic in this wall-to-wall coverage. Iowa doesn't even matter. I don't mean that. Hawkeyes, you're great, but Iowa doesn't matter, especially on the Republican side. Here's why. First, this applies to both parties. Despite all the talk, historically, fewer than 1 in 5 eligible Iowans actually participates in the caucuses. And two, as mentioned, the evangelicals are overrepresented. Most often, they vote for the candidate who best boasts of his religious fervor. It's what Ted Cruz has been trying to show from the beginning. It's what Marco Rubio has been talking about a lot over the last 2 or 3 weeks. It's why former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, who is an ordained minister, won in 2008, and why religion on his sleeve, former Senator Rick Santorum won in 2012, but none of them went on to become the standard bearer. So it's not so good for Cruz. If he does win in Iowa, it was expected. He's going to do well among the evangelicals, and it's not that important. If he loses, it's going to be hard to come back from that anytime soon. Trump leads the next couple. New Hampshire's, up in the Northeast, and he leads hugely, this is surprising, in South Carolina. Like I've said, this race has eclipsed any I have ever seen. Even 2012's flavor of the month primary season seems positively pedestrian by comparison. All right, so in another one of those on this day from the local paper, I've mentioned January 27th as the anniversary of Mozart's birth, but in 1973, prepared to sign the Vietnam Peace Treaty in Paris were both sides of the conflict. I look back at that time and I think it's a waste. Obviously it's a waste, but it's an enormous waste, an unbelievably enormous waste, and it comes from perspective. So if degrading ISIS doesn't work and one day we have to go back, we will go back understanding that we had to go because they were attacking us. They had attacked us. They attacked the French. They'll attack anywhere. But President Obama was right. They don't pose an existential threat to us. They won't cause us to cease to exist. But think back. Indochina was a French colony. If you remember John Adams and John Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson and some others of that sort, they didn't appreciate being colonies, being subjugated by rulers thousands of miles away, and in their case, their cultural roots were similar. Imagine being an indigenous people in Indochina, Asian, living under the rule of a completely different culture, the French, more than a few thousand miles away. Your land's raw materials aren't yours, they're taken by the French. Why did they do that? Because they could, they were stronger, they had better armaments. Oops, World War II happens, and now the French are beat up. And they come out of the war much weaker, so they hold on to some of their colonies, sort of, but the natives start fighting back. It's our land, we want it. There's a line drawn, North Vietnam, South Vietnam, it's renamed Vietnam. It's their land. The French are the interlopers, and finally they get whooped, 1954. We, by dint of our friendship with the French and our paranoia of these communists, so we go to help, first sent in by President Eisenhower. President Kennedy upped the ante, but not by much. He had visited Vietnam over 10 years previously, and he was very wary of sending troops there. Oh, but then he died, and while there were only a few thousand when he died, his successor, Lyndon Johnson, ended up sending over 500,000 Americans. Their land, our soldiers. How would you feel? The divide over that here became enormous. Lyndon Johnson didn't run again because of it. Richard Nixon was elected in 1968, but it still took over 4 years before they signed that agreement. Nearly 60,000 Americans were killed, and that doesn't count the thousands who died years later from the effects of Agent Orange. Who even knows how many Vietnamese were killed? Their land. All of that makes it wasteful. Less than 2 years later, after we pulled out, North Vietnam did indeed reunite their country. We trade with them today. But making it more than wasteful, but more like obscene, in the first half of President Nixon's first term, the conclusion was reached that the war could not be won. But he prosecuted the war, causing more and more people to die on both sides. Why? Why did he do that? Because the conclusion was also reached that to pull out meant he could not be reelected. Think I'm making that up? How do we know that? Why can I say that? Well, remember, it was President Nixon, and he recorded everything. Do I sound cynical? I suppose this world fosters cynicism. I'd just like to ask some of the candidates this, especially among the Republicans who, accepting Rand Paul, all talk about how they'll crush ISIS. I'm not defending ISIS, but crushing them, and especially carpet bombing them, will kill not only combatants, but civilians. So I find it ironic that those who speak with the most bloodlust are also the ones who, in a different section of the debates, all talk about the sanctity of all human life. How to reconcile? I suppose it should come as no surprise if I say I don't go to fast food joints anymore. Once, when my culinary skills consisted of hot water from the tap directly into instant coffee in the morning, or maybe I could boil a bag of frozen Stouffer's, fast food was pretty much my staple. Now, I am now not today a gourmet cook. I can handle some things. I even solved avocados. Now, my brother is a gourmet chef, really. I've learned a few things from him. I'm in awe of him. But there are a couple things I can make that he approves of. Anyway, my fast food avoidance won't surprise you if you consider that I've also become an advocate of non-processed foods, and certainly not GMO foods. So, okay, I could get a salad at McDonald's. Basically, I don't. But if asked, I'd say, sure, get the salad. If they have real eggs, fine. Avoid the buns. Avoid the fries. And I might say have the cheese sticks. They're good, right? Lots of protein. And McDonald's has recently come out with mozzarella cheese sticks. Yeah, breaded mozzarella cheese sticks. Well, I wouldn't have because of the breading, but I'm just guessing the breading isn't made from whole grain flour. But look at this. Look at this. Look what has some people up in arms. And who could blame them? All right, get your 3 mozzarella sticks, $2. But as one customer put it, these cheese sticks seem to be designed for those who are lactose intolerant. I can't even imagine how they end up like that. What do they fold the breading around? If you got a cheese stick in there, once it's melted, how do they vacuum it out? This is a mystery. It may not be as hard to solve as desktop fusion, but it may not be that far behind. And with that conundrum, whether you decide to cheese or not to cheese, I hope your upcoming week is the best one you've ever had.